I'm Klein, and this is my home glebe cottage. When I'm not presenting or writing about gardening, this is where I spend most of my time, and where I've been honing my horticultural skills for 40 years. Whether you've got a spacious plot, a tiny patio, or a few window boxes, there's nothing more exciting and satisfying than creating your own garden. From basic to more advanced techniques, I believe anyone can learn how to do it. Whether you're a complete novice or an experienced gardener, I want to help you develop the skills to make your garden grow. I'm ready. Are you? One of the most wondrous things about gardening is the way the garden changes all the time. And this week, it's the Magnolias. They've come out in all their splendour, these wonderful, exotic-looking flowers. And I've got two in my garden. I've got Magnolia stellata at the top, and this one. This is Magnolia Leonard Messel. I love it. It's just gorgeous. I can remember when we carried them home, just sort of twiggy sticks, planted them carefully, and gradually they've grown and grown until they've become one of the most magnificent features in the garden here. Everybody experiences magnolias, even if you're in the middle of a city. As soon as those magnolias come out, your eye's just drawn there. And for a tree that comes from far across the world, from the East and a few from America, it's just astonishing that they've just become part of our culture, definitely part of our horticulture. You can grow magnolias even in a tiny garden, providing you choose the right one. You can even grow one in a pot, and if you want those flowers, you really want good soil in there. They love lots of good food and nutrients. Really, I couldn't be without them. I just wish I'd planted more. It's these moments when the sun shines that you really begin to appreciate the quality of leaves. These cercidifilums are a perfect example. The light shines through the leaves and gives them a quality that they don't possess when the sun's not shining. But you also appreciate the tenderness of those leaves, how new, how fresh, how spring-like they are. It just makes you quiver. All around the garden, though, there are similar sort of leaves, not just on the trees, but at ground level too. There are epimediums who've had all their outside leaves sheared off, but now, springing forth are all those brand new shoots with these beautiful leaves. There's an incredible urgency about this time of year. It's very exhilarating, actually, but you've really got to get a move on because nature doesn't wait for gardeners. This part is suddenly sprung into life, and these matutia, these shuttlecock ferns, are just, well, they're doing what they say, they're shuttlecocking. And they're sprung up with all this brilliant green. All around these is the winter debris, their old fronds lying around them. I could just leave them, but I really feel like I want everybody to see them at their best. Actually, it's easier to pull all this off by hand. I've planted this fern right down at the bottom of this rather steep slope. It fancied a bit of mountaineering, so it's climbed right up the hill. Because what it does is send runners under the ground, and then up comes a brand new shuttlecock. And there's so much of it, I want to take a couple of bits from down at the bottom for a brand new project. Once your garden gets established, there are lots of opportunities, not just to go and buy new plants, but to use the plants you've got and to propagate them, make more from them. So this Matuccia has spread right across what is supposed to be a path. I think I'll take this one here. I mean, all these plants love a damp place. And you can hear this sort of slurp as these are coming out. And ferns have this wonderful root system because they grow amongst trees. So they can't go deep down into the soil because there's too much competition. So they tend to grow across the surface of the soil. But providing I take plenty of soil with this, then it's not going to know it's moved. That's the theory anyway. And there you can see, that's probably the root of the fern that sent itself under the soil just below the surface and then popped up and made this brand new frond. Just perfect. In spring, this part of my garden is such a treasure trove. I never know what I might find. Ooh, 3 lovely plants. Well, I've never thought of foraging down here, but it's a good spot if you're feeling a bit peckish. I've got a bit of this. It's a cardamine. It's related to watercress. I mean, it really is lovely, quite hot, really mustardy. This produces the most beautiful pinky purple flower, so I might have a bit of this too. So these plants are going on a journey to a lovely natural part of my garden where conditions are pretty damp. So this whole area here is damp because the pond actually overflows and the soil's very heavy too. So it's a ready-made bog garden. So there are plants running around here of our native yellow flag, Iris pseudochorus. And there's a spurge. This is Sychymensis, and it's got these delightful pink leaves. I think it's one of the most exciting of spring plants. But there's one thing that I'm going to add. I'm inspired by seeing this Fritillaria meleagris. That's a snake's head fritillary. You buy them as bulbs, little tiny bulbs. They're extremely cheap and they love living in very wet places. They used to thrive all over the United Kingdom, up and down the land in wet meadows. So I want to add all these plants here because I know they're going to thrive. And my bog garden is the perfect place to relocate my shuttlecock ferns. Do you want to give me a hand? I think we could plonk one of these Matuccias in. And you don't have to be delicate when you're putting these things in, because this is what they're used to. Sort of heavy clay. I think it's really satisfying to think that within a few weeks all this area will have started to green up. And to do it with plants that you've actually borrowed, stolen, begged from another part of the garden too. So what do you think of this? Yeah? No? Yeah, it's lovely, isn't it? Come on, let's go and find your sausage. If you think it's wet here, wait till you see where I'm headed next. I want my garden to be a place for all creatures to enjoy, but there are parts of it I need to work a little harder on to increase their allure to wildlife. This is my pond. It's not what you'd call an ornamental pond. Its whole purpose really is for the wildlife that I share my garden with. We've had tadpoles galore, but this year we had no tadpoles whatsoever, because sad to say, had really neglected the pond. And we started to discover, when scooping out the pond, so many dead leaves. Whatever you do, don't site your pond under overhanging trees. The leaves fall in and they'll pollute the water over time, especially when they build up like that. Having removed those leaves, now is the opportunity to add some more plants, put some oxygenators into the water, which are going to bring the pond back to life with some new plants. I've got 2 oxygenating plants that are going to help the pond come to life again. This is a special aquatic pot. It's got lots of holes in the side. So what I've done first of all is put a load of gravel in here. The whole purpose of that is just to weight the thing down when it goes into the water. And then I've just put ordinary, straightforward garden soil into the top here. And into it, I'm going to plant my spiked milfoil. It's sent to you like this in a little bundle, and it's got tiny little roots here. And I'm going to push it in. I think I can be quite rough with it, because that's just how it would grow in the bottom of a pond anyway. And this will actually grow under the water. Those roots will go down right into the mud at the bottom of the pond, and the plant will really take off. Now I'm aiming just here because this needs to go about 30 to 60 centimetres under. So I'm going to lower it down, down, down. Ooh. Well, I can't see how deep it is, but it's definitely submerged, and that's the whole point. These oxygenating plants are vital because they actually photosynthesize under the water, so they'll produce lots and lots of oxygen, which helps clear the water. It'll help other plants that are in here, and it'll be of great assistance to anything alive in here. So our pond begins to come back to life. You all right, Fifi? Yeah? You look perfectly at home. Now the next thing I want to put in here is another oxygenator. It's called hornwort, but this one you just chuck into the pond. It lives under the surface but introduces oxygen all the time. Good luck to this plant, because once it's in there, we're never likely to see it again. It'll just go on working. 1, 2, 3. Blub, 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 blub. There it goes. Bye. Any pond is a sort of colony of different kinds of plants, and you really need those different sorts of plants to attract different insects, help different creatures. So some of the plants live under the water, they're oxygenators. And then you can have marginals, the kind of plants that like to paddle. I've got one here. This is the ranunculus. It's a buttercup, and its common name is lesser spearwort. So it'll make bright yellow flowers. But this is a plant which needs to be in mud or heavy soil. Doesn't have to be under the water at all, as long as it's constantly damp. My bog garden and pond are vital habitats for all sorts of wildlife. But what about the edges of a garden? What about hedges and trees? Our hedgerows in the British Isles are one of the outstanding features of our landscape. They're one of the most important habitats as far as wildlife are concerned, which is extraordinary really, because they're all man-made. Most of the time they're composed of lots and lots of different native trees and shrubs. The plant at this time of year that shines out from every hedgerow is a sloe. All the field margins are just covered in the snow of their beautiful blossom. These blossoms contain masses and masses of pollen, and early bees really love it. And later on, this blossom gives way to beautiful fruits. But it's just one of the constituents of the hedgerow. And the more diversity there is in your hedgerow, the better, because the more creatures it's going to attract, feed, give shelter to. There's so much we can learn from the wild that we can apply at home. This lovely hedge runs right the way up my garden. Never measured it, but I do remember planting it maybe 25, 30 years ago. There may be as many as a dozen different varieties along the length of here. Plus there's honeysuckle and wild roses, all sorts of climbers, brambles here and there too. But because this is such an important habitat for all sorts of different creatures, there's absolutely no reason why you can't emulate it, replicate it on a much, much smaller scale in any garden at all. What do most British gardens have in common? They're surrounded by boundaries. But why not replace the fencing or some old privet, whatever it is that's in between, with a native hedge? And even if you've got fence panels there, no reason at all why you couldn't plant this sort of thing in front of them, let it grow, and eventually remove the fencing and just have the hedge. I'm going to show you an ancient technique for thickening up your hedges called laying. Now, can you see that the whole thing is not woven, it's laid? You take verticals like this and actually bend it down so it becomes a horizontal. Now it'll be cut right into here. That will stimulate all these little shoots and all the buds along that stem to start growing upwards. And that means that you end up with a really, really thick hedge, and that's what you're after. So this is a demonstration of what happens. But really sharp secateurs, and get your other hand right out of the way always, and just go in there. That's it. All the sap is going to flow right through there, but it's no longer going to go upwards, it's going to go across here. And I'm going to tie this in to another branch. It's just to keep it in place. When you see a hedge that's been laid, or you watch somebody doing it, it looks brutal, but it's not at all. It's all for the good of the hedge and all the creatures that are going to use it. So, a quick recap on how to lay a hedge. First, bend down a branch until it's horizontal, then partially cut into it with a sharp blade, and tie it into a neighbouring branch with string. But hedges aren't the only option when it comes to enticing creatures, great and small, into your garden. It could be that you haven't got anywhere you can plant a native hedge, but you've almost certainly got some walls. If you live in a house, you're pretty assured of that. And those walls can be utilised to be really, really splendid places to attract wildlife. On the east wall of our cottage, I planted this hydrangea petiolaris. It's a lovely climbing hydrangea, and it's become a haven as far as blackbirds, wrens, and then when the flowers open, of course it attracts insects. I should really have pruned it much better than I have. Well, because of my neglect, the plant has pushed itself further and further away from the wall, just trying to get away from these old dead flowers. So I just want to snip out those old bits now. Just make it look a little more pristine for when the flowers actually open. Being very careful that I'm not snipping off the new buds too. That's better. Mind you, this is just the bottom few feet, and I think the cottage is about 30 feet tall, so I've got quite a lot of work to do. If you don't want a climbing hydrangea, They grow brilliantly in pots as well. They're such excellent shrubs. They give a splendid show, and there are loads of different varieties. This is Hydrangea macrophylla. So all the mop heads, the ones with great big round heads, and the lace caps with these little florets around the edge, all belong to this group. And often people aren't quite sure about how to prune them. But basically, leave those flower heads on over the winter because they will protect these buds that are a bit lower down the stems. And wait until the spring. Wait until you're pretty sure there aren't going to be any more severe frost. Take a sharp pair of secateurs and then just cut right back to the next buds down. Take that deadwood out too. If you've got broken shoots, then take them back to a little green bud as well. Not much left, is there? So I think that's not a bad job at all. These hydrangeas should flower beautifully in the summer. But next, I want to look at a group of plants for whom spring is their time. What a beautiful day. It almost feels like summer. I can actually feel the sun on the back of my neck. And everywhere, everything is beginning to burgeon. There are shoots coming up that you've never seen before. The spaces in between the branches on the trees are sort of closing in as the leaves expand. Gardening's play as well as work. I'm very tempted to get the deck chairs out, but actually it's a bit too much to do. More and more distractions. First the sunshine, then the cat, yeah? She loves this corner because it's one of the sunniest corners in the garden. Now, I really wanted to grow the kind of plants that love sunshine. Some of the most lovely plants. Alpines. What are alpines? Well, they're plants which grow above the tree line. If you imagine the mountains, high mountains, there are no trees or shrubs growing above a certain height, simply because in the cold and extreme winds of the winter, they'd be seared and they'd be killed. But alpines have evolved to cope with that situation. They're almost all low growing. Some of them grow in the cracks and crevices in between the rocks, others carpet the ground. But when the snow comes, it smothers them under a thick carpet. And that, rather than causing them any harm, actually protects them. During the Victorian era, lots of people, if you had enough money, would undertake the grand tour of Europe, and part of that was invariably visiting the Alps to see these mountain tops. But you'd also hugely appreciate the plants that grew there. And it was thought for a long time that alpines would never thrive here. But that's absolutely not the case. We can provide them with rocks to grow between, really thin, poor soil, excellent drainage, and above all, a very sunny, exposed site. So I built this. It's a great big raised bed. The outside's not built of rubble, it's stone. And I filled it after I'd put in all this rubble with lots and lots of good loam, proper soil, mixed with masses of grit, because the whole object of the exercise is to make sure that it's really well drained. The sunshine speaks for itself. In high summer, it'll be absolutely beating down on this end, which is exactly why she loves sitting here. But now it's time to select a few plants to actually put in here. I love this. It's a little plant called, it's a cotula, And all you want to do is just rub it on your face because it's so soft. And this will make a carpet. Can you see underneath it's got several growing points, and it'll continue to grow outwards and make this lovely flat but textured carpet. Looks quite happy. Now, I think rockery phloxes, as people call them, must be one of the most popular plants because they're spectacular. You get this gorgeous show of flowers. I think behind this rock, if I can reach, would be a good place for this because it'll tumble then right over the edge. Lovely, isn't it? And I'm planting it slightly on its side because I think that will help it come forward and mean that if I put some grit around it, just under its crown, like that, that'll stop that centre rotting. But foliage too is really, really important. And there are some very straightforward plants that absolutely love living in this kind of place, which you grow for their leaves. So if I put this gorgeous golden thyme in here, if I work some of this gritty soil into the carpet, it will induce it to make little roots. So all those pieces will form what is ostensibly new plants. Each of these plants has its own special charm. Tiny leaves, beautiful foliage, gorgeous twinkling flowers. If you just examine one plant, you could study it for hours. They just really are the most beautiful of plants. So, a swift reminder when planting alpines. Choose the sunniest spot in the garden and make sure the soil's extremely well drained. Well, not content with planting up my big raised bed with alpines, I've also got around the garden several of these lovely troughs, and I want to put some more in here. You can use any sort of container really, providing that you've got excellent drainage in it, lots and lots of holes in the bottom, loads of crocks and really gritty soil, and you site it in a very, very sunny sort of place. And these plants we're talking about are miniatures as well. They're exquisite. But I'm going to choose fairly straightforward plants for this. Nothing at all fussy. So here's a little Veronica. It's called Veronica prostrata, blue mirror. So the very fact that something has got prostrata in its label means that it's going to grow fairly flat, fairly level. It's got these spikes of blue flowers and they'll open in succession. Now I've arranged a few rocks in here, so that one can just go in the front there. And you want to plant them so that the top of the crown, again, is level with the soil around them. Push them in well. Now, in between these two rocks here, I want to put a little plant which is called Primula marginata, because the leaves have got a little silver edge to them. Now, you find very often that these alpines have got all sorts of strategies and devices to make sure that they can withstand the sun. And here the leaves are quite succulent, so they can store water. I'm not going to plant this one upright like that, because in its natural habitat it would definitely grow on its side in between rocks. So I'm going to squeeze it in between these two rocks. How lovely. Time for a splash of yellow. Now that this is a plant that I'm only just getting acquainted with, it's called Delosperma congestum and it's from South Africa. I think I'm going to have this really close to the Veronica, but in between the rocks. The whole thing will become much more natural as it grows together. And that's what you want. You want it to be a little snapshot of a mountainside, even though these plants come from different parts of the world. they're never going to look incongruous because they all come from the same sort of habitat. What do you think? Oh, do you? Oh, thank you very much. I love having new projects on the go in my garden, but I do my best not to neglect the year-round project that is growing gorgeous things to eat. These are broad beans, and the seed for them was given to me by a lovely lady, and I was particularly keen to have this broad bean. They call it the crimson flowered broad bean, but it's very, very beautiful, and it's a bean that you grow initially to eat, but I think it makes a beautiful adjunct in any sort of flower border. So it has quite a short growing season, and we'd be able to harvest beans from this in a couple of months' time. But there are all sorts of different broad beans, loads of different varieties. Now, because they're legumes, they've got a brilliant root system. They don't need any extra food at all. And they do that thing of producing these little nodules on their roots that all legumes do, peas, beans, a lot of them. And that actually brings nitrogen from the soil and makes it available both to the plant itself and to other plants nearby. So they're great for your soil too. I mean, it is such a pretty plant, isn't it? And it's also got a glorious scent. And if you've got a small garden, there's nothing to stop you planting a broad bean like this amongst your flowers. You could put several in, admire the beauty of their flowers, and later on harvest your crop and keep eating them. When you're spacing them, it depends what variety you're using. So a small variety, closer together, 18 inches or so apart. I'm putting them either side of this. Hello, cat. She's nosy, isn't she? She always wants to know what's going on. And the great thing is, you can save that seed too. Just like the kind friend did who gave me the seeds for these in the first place. They'll store brilliantly well. They reckon they've even found evidence that they ate them in the Stone Age. So obviously in the bottom of your cupboard they're going to manage for the winter or so. Well, it'll be some time before I can harvest these broad beans, but these leeks are long overdue. And I'm really looking forward to eating some of these. Now, I sowed the seed for these in a big pot way back. When you're planting leeks, you get these little seedlings, you know, about pencil thickness, and you actually make a hole, first of all, with, I don't know, we use an iron bar, really quite deep, and then you just drop the leeks, and sometimes you can't even see the top. And then you water them in, and that's it. You just leave them, and then you harvest them, and then you eat them. Small, but perfectly formed. Look at that. The smaller they are, the more tender they are. That's what I'm telling myself anyway. They're not exactly prize winners, are they? But they will be delicious. I mean, why else would you grow your own, frankly? Some people grow their leeks just for exhibition. But next I'm going to introduce you to a group of plants who truly take centre stage. Oh, pale but perfect. Look at those. I'm always telling people they've got to enjoy the gardens too. I'm forever rushing around, so it's lovely just occasionally to make yourself do it. So right now, I'm just admiring these tulips. I mean, all the petals could have fallen, I could have missed it completely. Because I suppose the life of any plant is made up of these moments, and none more so than with tulips. The way these tulips live and gradually die, it's just a reminder that everything's ephemeral, everything changes, it's all part of a long, ongoing cycle. It's just like life. I've already taken a virtual trip to the Alps, but now I want to scale a different peak, courtesy of another group of high-altitude plants that I absolutely adore. Just look at these. Aren't they absolutely delectable? Every single one of them is different. These are auriculars, and we've been growing them for centuries and centuries in this country. But they're all descended originally from mountain plants. I've got one here, which is, I'm afraid it's a bit neglected, but I can see that if I'm canny and lucky, I might be able to get a few more plants out of this. With auriculars, they actually make offsets. So right from the base, underneath the soil, a new shoot will come up on its own stem. So first of all, I want to tip it out. And I'm going to grasp the main plant like that, firmly between my thumb and forefinger. And I'm just going to sort of wheedle this away from here. Oh, keep your fingers crossed. Yeah. Can you see? It's already got a little root system here. So all I'm going to do is give it its own little pot. And it's lovely to use clay pots for auriculars because it's a bit more like their mountain home, I suppose. This is a mixture of sterilised soil and lots of grit in here. And I'm just going to push it in, and then, holding it upright, I'll just put a bit of extra compost around it. So I'm actually covering that stem on the top of the compost. And then just a little bit of grit. Auriculars have been plants that people have grown specifically to show. And there was this big sense of competition, but also extreme pride in growing the best auricular. Actually, when people used to grow them for exhibition, they'd have all these recipes for the compost that they were using. They'd never ever share their recipes, especially if their auriculars were prize winners, then you'd want to keep it to yourself. Hello, do you like them? Yeah. Well, I think this plant deserves a bit of convalescent treat. So I've shaken most of the old compost off it, using exactly the same compost. Make sure those roots are going straight down, but I want to cover the rest of those bare stems under the rosettes of leaves and just nestle it in. And I'll just pour that grit in right around the crown of the plant. And then we're ready for action, aren't we? I've always fancied displaying these plants just as the true auricular enthusiasts used to do. And thanks to the carpentry skills of my Neil, I'm about to turn that fantasy into reality. There's a step here, Neil. Please don't fall down it. Another step. Keep going, keep going. I thought it would be really light as a feather, but it's not. Are you okay, love? Was that your shin? Don't panic, Mr. Mannering.
Sao tim ta đau, khoe mắt ai lâu, liệu ngày sau niềm đau kia có phai mau. hôn xuống còn nhiều điều muốn nói. Giờ đây đôi tim đã chia hai lối rồi. Hoài tiếc nuối về chuyện tình lỡ tan, để mình anh góc phố đêm về thơ than. Hôn xuống còn nhiều điều muốn nói, nhưng giờ đây đôi tim đã chia hai lối rồi. Hoài tiếc nuối về chuyện tình lỡ than, để mình anh góc phố đêm về thơ than.
Welcome to my Auricular Theatre. Isn't it lovely? You think it's lovely now, you wait until we put all these auriculars up on these shelves. Now, Auricular theatres became the fashion, but you had to be posh, you had to have loads of money, and you get the gardeners to construct such a thing. Well, my Neil's made this. I think it's lovely, and it's oak, so it'll be quite happy to live outside. The people who grew them for exhibition would never have had anything like this. They would have grown them in the backyards, perhaps under a bit of glass. It's a vanity, if you like, but it's a brilliant way to actually display your auriculars. And there are so many different ones. The pure joy of it is to arrange them. So I think we'll have that one there. A little yellow one in between. Oh, pale but perfect. That's the stalls taken care of, and now we'll move up. It's not quite the upper circle yet, but what's going on this next row? This one. This is one called Old Cottage Blue. And look at that, look how many flowers there are. And part of the reason for having a roof on this is just to make sure that the rain doesn't fall directly on them. Oh, look at this. How exquisite is that? Perfection, it's beautiful. One more, room for one more. Oh, really, I'm spoilt for choice. Oh. Each one's a picture and the whole thing is a picture, isn't it? Or it's a theatre. So much of gardening is about downright hard work. I thoroughly enjoy it all, but every so often, isn't it just wonderful to wallow in this beauty, just to enjoy it. It's wonderful. Hello. What do you think of this Auricular Theatre? Isn't it just lovely? I mean, in an established garden like this, there are so few opportunities to actually have something completely different. The auriculars are beautiful, and the theatre's pretty good too. It's a privilege to have something special like that, but it's such a privilege to be able to share your garden with all manner of things, with the plants, with the animals, the birds, the lot. Oh, I'm with my family. Next time, I'll be showing you what to do with your glorious spring bulbs once they've finished flowering. And do you know the difference between wet and dry herbs? If you don't know now, you soon will. This is Chervil. I probably sowed it a bit thickly. Look at that, it's like a little forest in there.